Praise God. Thank you, Pastor Glenn, and it's a great honor to be here. Thank you, Pastor Brown, for the invitation, being part of this wonderful gathering of believers here. I want to just immediately begin to add to the words that we're hearing this week. I have a message today I call, Are You Fair-Minded? Are you fair-minded? And I'm going to follow this up with 4, yea, even 5 questions. So one of the realities that we are facing today is that we are being polarized into camps. We are living in a day of extreme polarization, where in order just to find sanity, you've got to go hide somewhere, you know. And but one of the consequences of that is it's becoming more and more difficult to maintain our equilibrium when it comes to relating to the rest of the world. And this will play out in evangelism as well. And so you have to, at the one point, stand for God, but on the other point, kind of maintain an open mind, so to speak. And it's very, very difficult to do that. And we find ourselves, if we're not careful, just leaning in one direction and hiding under a certain kind of thought process that leaves us very unfair-minded. And I want to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 19, and try to glean from these questions. It says in verse 19, wisdom makes one wise man more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. There is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. Verse 23, all this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I'm determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. So I want to talk about this question, are you fair-minded? And I want to begin by relating a lesson that I've learned. I've been in the United States. I've been preaching various places. I've kind of told different aspects of this story. But basically, back in June when I came back into the UK, I found out over the process of being scrutinized and red flagged at Heathrow that we had a technicality to sort out. And that's really what it is, organizational technicality. And so I was unceremoniously placed in detention at Heathrow for 15 hours. And this you begin to discover this could take a while, you know what I mean? So I'm sitting in there, and I am vexed. I am totally vexed as they're trying to sort this out. And while I'm sitting there, this young woman comes in. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it brought something out of me. Now, I found out later she was a European Brazilian 22-year-old girl named Rachel. But I looked at her, and she had like a tattoo on her neck and tattoos on her arm and a certain kind of attitude. And I said to myself, oh, no. Say, here comes the little Antifa Extinction Rebellion chick. That's what I thought. They probably busted her with a can of spray paint in her bag, you know. I'm just sitting there just being judgmental, being honest. She probably looked at me and said, here's a middle-aged guy, he probably eats meat and drives a gasoline engine car, you know. We're just judging each other. And after a while, I was there a while, she was there a while. You got to start talking to somebody. You know, it's like being in jail. Like, what are you in for? I don't know. What are you in for? They caught me running numbers at Betfred, maybe, you know. And, just a little technical. But the bottom line is I began to just talk to this girl over a period of time. I began to discover her humanity. She was quite clever. She had a very good sense of humor, very reflective, some really bright comments about, life and what she'd gone through. Completely opposite. I wasn't totally wrong about her politics, you might say. But what I did learn is how we are so out of sorts many times in our thinking. We're very unfair in the way we view people, and probably vice versa. So I have some questions here. And by the way, as the time progressed, which we had lots of, God opened a door, and I was really able to minister to this girl, toward the end of that period. But here's the point, and I'm going to just pose these points and questions. Number one, you can test yourself in your seat. Are you fair-minded? Number one, do you give the benefit of the doubt to others? This is what he is talking about in this verse. He's saying, he goes from this wisdom, but he says something that's very interesting here. He said, there's not a righteous man, basically, who's perfect. And so when I ask the question, do you give the benefit of doubt to others, what you're really having to process here in this statement is, the fact is, everybody's flawed. In that you can approach life, if you want to, with a critical mindset that deconstructs everyone you don't like. It's very easy. And he's making the point, he said, even the best of them are flawed. Now there's a word, the word here for righteous is Sadiq in Hebrew. Righteous, it probably has the same meaning in Arabic because you hear this name. But the name Sadiq means righteous, as I said. Now, there's a local politician by that name. Wouldn't class, with that word. But in English, righteous is a descriptive term. But in Hebrew, it's a noun. It's an adjective in English, but in Hebrew, it's a noun. In other words, it's saying that when you called somebody a Sadiq, you were saying they were unquestionably a good person. This person is straight and narrow. This person's honorable. This person is ethical. This person, is true to what they are presenting themselves to be to the best of their ability. But he says there's not a Sadiq that's perfect, that never sins. So that's making a statement. He's not using the word descriptively. He's using it particularly. And the fact of the matter is that when you have a certain mindset, you need to be very careful because once you start deconstructing one, you can just deconstruct everybody. Psalm 130 says, if you, the Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? And so when we start marking iniquities, who can stand? I really appreciate the message by Pastor Greg yesterday about the flawed person and seeing through that. I mean, if you really want to start counting people, I'm talking about being fair-minded now. Who can stand up to that? Fair-mindedness means grasping that even the most honest, sincere people have their flaws. And many people, they live to capture those flaws and to exploit those flaws. But I'm going to make a statement here connected to this. It is a great mistake to think you can bring down a good person because of their flaws. You're not just tampering, with the person now. You're tampering with God. We know the story in Genesis of the curse upon Canaan, brought on by his father Ham. And how Noah, after 40 days and 40 nights and, a year basically on the boat. And, he had enough, had a drink, and things didn't turn out so well. But we see that in this moment of weakness, Ham's reaction to that was, aha, I caught him in his weakness. Didn't work out for Ham that way, did it? There was a curse that actually rested upon his offspring based on his reaction to think, I can bring this good man into humiliation now. I will just say this, there's a great danger in over-exalting leaders. You know why? Because this leads to inevitable disappointment and deconstruction. Inevitably. When someone is lifted too high. So when Cornelius bowed down to Peter, Peter said, get up. I'm also a man. I don't think he was just being a little humble. Hey, I'm a man too. I think he was like, I don't want this thing to go pear-shaped. Get up. There's nothing good is going to come out of this. So the question is, do you give others the benefit of the doubt? Because if you think just someone's flaws are a good reason to judge them, you're making a big mistake. I talked about this young lady. God wanted me to minister to her, but my first reaction was, what the heck? Who the heck is this? You know what I mean? Because but it affects evangelism, people, how we view the world, how we break people down, how we look at the externals. Now, here's number 2. Are you overly sensitive to gossip? Now, I'm talking about how to be fair now. He goes from there and he says, do not pay attention to every word people say. Some people, you'll never be fair-minded. Sensitive people, super sensitive people are not fair-minded because they interpret everything in terms of how it makes them feel, how they react to it, what they're picking up, what impulses they're trying to decipher in themselves. Overly sensitive people cannot gauge correctly because they're always thinking there's some subtext to every little thing. They're too self-aware and too focused on superficial things. Did you see the way her eye moved there? Yeah, no, I mean, that blink, that means something, Jesus said, stop judging by mere appearances and make right judgments. I mean, that's a good rebuke. Sometimes we as Christians, we super spiritualize these things. We call it discernment. Jesus called it judgment, but we call it discernment. Some people are so sensitive. They're capable of amazing things, but they cannot interact with people to any great degree. You're just too sensitive. In Tucson, we used to, when I was on staff there, we used to have an espresso maker. It wasn't a bad one. It probably cost a little bit less than 1,000 pounds from Starbucks. Now today, the Tucson church in their new building, they have a cafe, a proper one. And when I was there, I would go to prayer meeting in the mornings, and it was great. You didn't have to go to Walmart and light incense at a woke altar in order to get a cup of coffee. Starbucks. And, but over there you just buy one. But when back in the olden days, we had our own little machine in the kitchen. And it worked half the time. And we would bring the guy in to fix it, to maintain it. And I remember him saying, there's nothing wrong with the machine. The sensors are just a little bit too sensitive. Just got to clean it off. They get a little bit of dust on them, and they get too sensitive. And here's the point. This wonderful espresso maker, when it was working, it was great. But it was often rendered useless because it was too sensitive. You can be shiny out of the box, but if you're too sensitive, what can you do? Be great to work with that. That'd be a wonderful disciple. This would be a tremendous, person for this position or sister for that. But when you're too sensitive, you're not fair-minded. You will not get along with people. You always think people are against you. You always think people have a reason for mistreating you. There's another motive there. Overly sensitive people are geared to looking for offense. You're waiting for someone to trigger you. I love this in 1 Samuel chapter 24. David, he's running from Saul, and he has an opportunity to take Saul out a couple times, but David knows that's not what God wants him to do. But I like this straightforwardness. He said to Saul in chapter 24, why do you listen to the words of men who say, David seeks your harm. I mean, David is frustrated. He's running from him. He you know what I mean? He's handling him in many ways with kid gloves. He doesn't want to really fight back. But he finally has this moment, after dodging spears from Saul, saying, why do you listen to this stuff? And that's many times, you know what I'm talking about. As a pastor, you're working with people. You're trying to maybe situations of family in the church, or just working out things with disciples, and they're so bent already as you try to interact, and you think, why are you listening to this stuff? Why do you choose that stuff? Because you're too sensitive, that's why. So, second question, do you pay too much attention to what other people say? Here's question number 3. Do you keep the golden rule? Now, what do you mean? Remember Matthew 7, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Here in verse 22, I love this, the practicality and the honesty of this statement. He's talking about people that are too sensitive about other people's words. But he says in verse 22, for you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. Man, how can you be so sanctimonious about your pain here? I mean, we're all human beings, right? We all have had our moments. We all sit down with your confidants and you say things and you let yourself go a little bit further than maybe you should say. And I'm not saying that's right, but I'm saying we've all done it. And yet there are some people that are just so overwhelmed when they hear that someone has dared, offered an opinion contrary, to their personal sense of identity. I mean, come on. That's an unfair-minded person right there. If you're too sensitive, and B, you're not honest about what you say and what you think, you're not fair. You have lost yourself in the corner. Everybody has an opinion. So don't be so sensitive. Do you have an opinion? I come from, I'm not saying it's all good. I'm just saying, but I come from a family where everybody they have more than one opinion. You know what I'm saying? Growing up like that with your brothers and everything, people, it can get tense at times. But here's the point, is fair-mindedness requires empathy. This is a very important word, and this is something that many people don't understand today. Empathy is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's empathy. And it shouldn't be that difficult. I love that verse in Job, where Job is figuring it out, what it's like. It says, men at ease have contempt for misfortune. This is one of Job's statements. Men at ease have contempt for misfortune. Now, you got to realize, Job had lived his entire life blessed. He was a member of the country club. He wore knickers and golfed all the time, And they would see these broken people and what is wrong with those people? Can't they just get a job, move some money around from one of their annuities and kind of pick themselves up a bit? But when he got sick and he suffered tragedy and he suffered personal loss and disaster, he had a revelation that men at ease have a lot of contempt for people that are struggling. And so what you call that is empathy. He learned empathy based on his struggle. He was able to finally put himself in the shoes of somebody who hurt, somebody who struggled. And so one of the things that we all have to do to be fair about things, you English people love to say it, British people, to be fair. You all say that, to be fair. Well, to be fair, you have to have empathy. You got to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. You have to. That's the golden rule. And you find out how many Christians do not keep the golden rule. They call it the golden rule for a reason. Because this one should be right at the very top. I was doing a class in Tucson for our AO, that's Alpha and Omega. It's the university group that meets on the University of Arizona. And I did I have a teaching from the past, but I got inspired. It's called Surviving the Religion of Your Parents. It's on Isaac and Abraham offering Isaac. I think it was a pretty inspired idea. But one of the girls at the end, they're like, but how do you, they're like, yeah, but how do you forgive? You know, how do you really, okay, so this particular girl, she wasn't actually from our group. She from another background, and she had trouble. Her mother was a very inconsistent church person. And so she says, how do you cope with it? And I said, you know, at some point you have to get perspective. You've got to get perspective. When you mature, that's part of being a mature person. You get perspective. If your parents were less than perfect, what do? You have to say, wow, they must have had quite a different path than I have. Some of you kids, you didn't grow up with your parents. If you're from church, you know, hopefully with the police at your house on domestic calls, and dad coming home drunk if he came home at all. And so you see people, you have to stop and say, people have different backgrounds. They come from different positions. They have a different experience than you have. And part of maturity is saying, okay, I may not understand totally this or that, but I do know they come from somewhere else. I'll put myself in their shoes, what it would be like to grow up like that and find my way into being a stable father or a stable husband or a stable mother. It's called empathy. And that is the golden rule. And probably the number one reason people do not have a fair mind is because they don't ever think about anyone but themselves. They cannot see outside of their own pathway. Fair-mindedness, I will say, you know, I was talking about hypersensitivity. I'll say one thing. If you learn how to be fair-minded, you learn some empathy, you'll cure hypersensitivity. That's what the doctor said right there. Empathy will cure hypersensitivity. Number 4. This is a bit of a trick question, but are you always fair? Verse 23, I appreciate the honesty. He said, I wanted to be wise, but this was beyond me. I think this is one of the greatest revelations of really taking on a fair-minded view of the world. Is that we have to all admit at times it is beyond us. So when I ask the question, are you always fair? Like I said, it's a bit of a trick question because it says in Proverbs, most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? So we automatically think we're right all the time. Don't you get it? So we say, of course I'm always fair. It's me. That's probably one sure sign that you're not. You know, in Matthew 26, this is one of the best endorsements of the honesty of Jesus' disciples came. When he said, one of you will betray me. And it says in verse 22, they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each of them said, except for the one who was going to betray him, said, is it I? I mean, isn't that reassuring? Maybe at that moment it wasn't reassuring that each of them could doubt themselves so thoroughly that I might betray Jesus. But think about how reassuring that is. These guys may not have been all that, as Pastor Greg was preaching in some ways, but they were honest. They said, do I not know myself to the point where I could do something kind of crazy like that? You know, like these old psycho, thriller stories, where the person, they go to bed at night thinking they're like the best citizen in the community, and then they're like a mass murderer in the middle of the night. Could I do something like that? I mean, what honesty that took. That's a fair-minded person right there. Like, I don't know myself. I don't know everything. There's a word that we would equate with unethical, but it's the word unscrupulous. A word you often hear tied to certain job descriptions like politicians and with unscrupulous, unethical. You know, what's important about this word, I remember, studying this a while back, is the word unscrupulous comes from the word scruples. You know what a scruple is? What scruple means? A doubt. A scruple is a doubt. You doubt. An unscrupulous person is somebody who never doubts themselves. Literally. Someone who never says to themselves, I could be wrong. And now how do you associate that with being unethical? Well, just connect the dots. People who never doubt themselves are always going to be empowered to do whatever they want to do with other people. Well, I'm not right. I've got to feed my family. I've got to make this sale. And that you're unscrupulous. You don't doubt yourself. One of the signs of good people is that you doubt yourself sometimes. I know we live in we don't live in America. We live in the UK. I'm come from America. And in America, having supreme confidence is like the most important quality you could ever have in life. That's it. That's the top of it. That's the ultimate accomplishment, that you just feel so dang good about yourself, But I don't think that's a biblical quality, never necessarily. Because are you always right? Of course not. None of us are always fair. That's like step one for being fair. It doesn't mean you have to know it all. They throw this out to leaders, I may have mentioned in the past, one of my favorite rulings in the entire Bible is in 2 Samuel chapter 19, when David is told that, prior to that Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, is a traitor, even though he's been kind to him. And he's told this by Mephibosheth's servant Ziba. And so finally, Mephibosheth catches up to David and says, no, Ziba's lying. And Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth is lying. And I love David's ruling on this. You know what he said? He said, basically, I'm going to fill in the blanks here. He says, I'm hungry. I'm tired. I've been fighting wars. You take half. Get out of my way. I'm going to my tent. And so David didn't say, I'm David, I know everything, let me see. Oh, yes, definitely. Mephibosheth, that's a good man right there. Or Ziba, no, Ziba's the guy. Ziba's my man here. He said, I don't know. I don't know. I love that ruling. I don't know. Because we always think whatever we think is true. Not necessarily. Sometimes the most fair you'll ever be at saying, listen, man, I got too many personal prejudices in this to be fair. They have in the legal system, I'm sure they have it here, like in the U.S., when a judge is related to a case, they're supposed to they're supposed to remove themselves from the case, because that's their way of saying, right? That's the way of saying, I may not be able to be fair here, which is the fairest thing they could say, is to recuse themselves. Now, I'm going to show you a picture here. You can go to the title page, because it's a little clearer. If you go to the title page, it's a little clearer. If you'll notice, you can look up to the statue here. Do you see the blindfold? This is Lady Justice. This is Our Lady Justice image, idol. Not that she's doing her part right now, but but the blindfold. You know what the blindfold means? You know what the blindfold means? that real justice is, I'm so smart, I can figure it all out. No, no, no. Real justice is, I'm not smart enough to figure it all out, right? I have to be blind to myself in this before I can find out what the truth is. That's why I ask the questions. Are you always fair? No. Therefore, you have to put the blinders on sometimes, which brings me to my last point here, last question. Do you lack this wisdom? It says in James, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously without reproach. Many of us know that verse. It's a beautiful verse. I love the last part of that, without reproach. Well, we have to say, God, I need to learn how to manage my perspective. What we're dealing with today, people, as I said at the beginning, is mass polarization. We are being pushed into little corners and little camps of society. And ultimately, as Christians, it's going to hurt our ability to evangelize people in earnest. Because everyone will be so pre-sorted that we won't want to even deal with them. And they won't want to deal with us. 2016 had one of the catchphrases of the year. This is not 2020, 2016 was the word rigged. It was considered one of the top 10 in one different polls, but one of the top 10 catchphrases of 2016 was rigged. And you know, this shows you where we are as a society. Everybody's got their finger pointed in both directions. This is rigged, that's rigged, this is rigged, you're rigged. Pastor Brown rigged the conference schedule. Speaking of 2016, some of you follow the NBA here, you know. The Warriors were playing Cleveland in the championship series. And at this particular time, the Warriors were still kind of up and coming. They had won, but you know, Steph Curry, you guys know who Steph Curry is. He's up and coming. And just to kind of give you perspective, they were playing Cleveland. Cleveland at the time was a team of LeBron James. Now, LeBron James, up to this point, was the NBA. He was Mr. NBA. He had the commissioner probably on speed dial. And he was very unhappy in Game 5, and he accused the referees of not making the proper calls when it came to fouls. That would have given him opportunities to shoot free throws in, you know, basketball. And so the very next game, suddenly, you know, LeBron is given everything he wanted and more, you know, and I think his free throw shots tripled. You could always spot, you know, check me out later on. But anyway, this was very frustrating. The Warriors were getting very, very frustrated. And Steph Curry, the star of the Warriors, got tossed from the game. He expressed himself too much, and one of the referees threw him out of the game. And his wife, Aisha, this is the problem with Twitter now. She went to Twitter. She went to Twitter after that. And I think I have it right at the top there. But her tweet, she said, "I've lost all respect. Sorry, this is absolutely rigged for money or ratings. I'm not sure which. I won't be silent. Just saw it live. Sorry." You know, I'm thinking, so here's Curry's wife accusing his employer basically of being rigged. And although I do give her a little props for standing by her man like that, but still, this league pays her husband millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. And so you don't have to know too much to know that everyone was retracting and falling back on their heels and recanting and apologizing and, you know, just a moment of weakness. Moment of weakness. I was too emotional. But what we see here, though, I think in many respects, is we have a bent in us. And being a fair-minded person is something that you have to contend for. And Solomon is writing in Ecclesiastes after a life of being blessed and then a life of failure in between and a life of recovering. He's learned a lesson here. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. And that it's something you have to contend for, that we have to constantly deal with ourselves about. Because I believe that being a fair-minded person is what keeps us connected to a lost world. To say, okay, you know, I'm here, they're there. God, how can we bridge this gap and touch somebody for Jesus? I mentioned this story in the beginning, this young lady, Rachel, that as I began to talk to her and just, you know, get to know her as a person. We're trapped in the same situation. You know, there was a friendship for the moment, anyway, an allied relationship. And like I said, God opened the door for me to minister to this girl, just really deal with her. At the very beginning, that would have been impossible, but to really deal with her. But the mentality that I began with was, no way. Basically, I was saying to myself, I don't like this kind of person. And she probably looked at me and said, I don't like that kind of person. So we can live there if we want to. But ultimately, having a open mind for evangelism is relating to being a fair-minded person in life, how we deal with each other and how we see the big picture. Amen. That's what I have today. The Lord bless you. Who's coming?